All right, we have got to live images coming in from Russia, Kazan, as Prime Minister Modi is at this summit, the BRICS Summit, that is scheduled for tomorrow, but bilateral talks that's happening now. Prime Minister Modi is also likely to hold talks with Xi Jinping, his Chinese counterpart. Speculation is rife that the India-China bilaterals will also be held right on the sidelines of the BRICS Summit. In fact, this is Prime Minister Modi currently in Kazan, Russia. He's going to be holding bilaterals, a confirmation coming in, one with Putin, of course, and the other is likely, the buzz is, it's likely with Xi Jinping. Right now, Prime Minister Modi leaving a hotel for the BRICS Summit and a meeting with the President of Russia, Putin. Now, this is certainly significant. The host of this edition of the BRICS Summit is Russia. President Putin has acted as a host for nearly 30 world leaders. For him, certainly, for Russia, this is a massive statement that they're making to the West to show that they're not isolated and they have their allies with them. Shashank Mattu, our correspondent who's tracking the developments at the BRICS Summit, joins us for more on that. Shashank, give us more on Prime Minister Modi's bilateral with Putin. He's due to have any time now.
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to be a major meeting between the two leaders after their bilateral summit in July, which also took place in Russia. Really, there are a couple of important things that the two leaders will probably be discussing. The first one is something that the Foreign Secretary, Vikram Misri, alluded to yesterday, which is that there are still 20 Indians that are in service in the Russian military. These were several people who were taken, or around 100 were taken to Russia under false pretenses. They were made to serve with the Russian military when they were promised jobs as helpers. 85 Indians have been released, but 20 more are still in service of the Russian military. So that is something that Prime Minister Modi is going to urge that President Putin pushed the Russian system on. There's going to be conversations about a free trade agreement between India and Russia. Remember, for a long time, the India-Russia trade relationship has just been about energy and oil. The two countries are going to discuss trying to broaden that a little bit. So a free trade agreement is something that is going to be in the works. There's conversations about industrial cooperation between the two countries, working on joint projects in transport engineering, chemical industries, and so on and so forth. And of course, also a migration partnership to make it easier for Indians to travel to Russia, as well as live and work and study there. So that's also a major people-to-people connection between India and Russia that the two sides have been missing over the last couple of years. And of course, finally, India and Russia are going to be working on a new nuclear power project.
All right, those are the images there of Prime Minister Modi, who's just met with Putin. That's the first bilaterals that's being held as part of the BRICS Summit. This is certainly big. The first bilateral for Prime Minister Modi is with the host himself, Vladimir Putin. Those are live images that we are beaming for you. Prime Minister Modi holding a series of bilaterals. It seems like the first one is with the Russian President, Vladimir Putin. Let's have a listen.
Позвольте мне вас всех сердечно поприветствовать в России, на этот раз в Казани. Это один из наших исторически замечательных городов в Поволжье. Я с теплотой вспоминаю ваш июльский визит в Москву и плодотворные переговоры с вами. Мы регулярно обмениваемся информацией по телефону. Признателен, что вы откликнулись на наше приглашение и лично приехали в Казань на саммит БРИКС. Сегодня мы вместе примем участие в церемонии открытия саммита. Затем предстоит общение лидеров за ужином. И таким образом мы начнем уже нашу работу. В Казани мы должны принять целый ряд важных решений, направленных на дальнейшее совершенствование деятельности объединения и укрепление в Казань на саммит БРИКС. Сегодня мы вместе примем участие в церемонии открытия саммита. Затем предстоит общение лидеров за ужином. И таким образом мы начнем уже нашу работу. В Казани мы должны принять целый ряд важных решений.
Putin speaking. Shashank Mattu is still with us. Shashank, please, as he speaks in Russian, we're going to wait for that translation to play out. But in the meanwhile, what's on the agenda for India and Russia as part of this BRICS bilaterals? What's due to be discussed?
Absolutely. So, as I was mentioning before, there are still around 20 Indians who are in service of the Russian military who were taken there in many cases under false pretenses, victims of human trafficking. India is going to try to make sure that they are discharged in an early fashion. President Putin has been very open to working with India on this in the past, and Prime Minister Modi will no doubt push him on this particular issue as well. There's a lot of anticipation around a new Russian and Indian nuclear energy project. That is something that India and Russia would also be looking to work on and pushing their relationship on that. Of course, we also know that the big BRICS Summit is going to be happening as well. This is, of course, happening on the sidelines of that. Expansion of the BRICS is something that you're going to see absolutely being discussed.
बहुत विषयों पर इसके बीच हम टेलीफोन पर कई बार हमने बात की। कजान आने का आमंत्रण स्वीकार करने के लिए मैं आपका बहुत आभारी हूँ। तो आज हम ब्रिक्स शिखर सम्मेलन के उद्घाटन सेरेमनी में भाग लेंगे और उसके बाद डिनर के समय हम भी बात करेंगे दूसरे नेताओं के साथ। आज आने वाले ब्रिक्स के दौरान समिट के दौरान हमें कई बहुत महत्वपूर्ण निर्णय पर पूरा करना चाहिए। तो एक बार फिर कज़ान में आपका स्वागत है।
В Казани мы должны принять целый ряд решений по совершенствованию деятельности объединения.
Prime Minister Modi to the BRICS Summit. Well, there are multiple issues on the agenda at this point. Of course, the West Asia escalation will be coming up. That will be discussed as per sources. Apart from that, there will also be discussions on how to reduce dependence.
भारत के बीच जो सहयोग चल रहा है, हम वो बहुत महत्वपूर्ण मानते हैं। खासतौर पर ये बात भी आगे चलता है।
И очередное заседание межправкомиссии намечено на 12 ноября в Нью-Дели.
Agenda is also likely with President Putin proposing the idea of an alternative payment system that will act as a rival to SWIFT, the international financial network, which Russia has been banned from since the war began with Ukraine in 2022. Now,
और जो आपने कज़ान में भारत का कौंसल जनरल खोलने का निर्णय लिया, हम इसका स्वागत करते हैं।
Расширение дипломатического присутствия Индии в России будет способствовать дальнейшему развитию двусторонних отношений.
भारत के कूटनीतिक उपस्थिति से हमारे सहयोग को फायदा मिलेगा।
Уважаемый господин премьер-министр, мы очень рады видеть вас и всю вашу представительную команду в России.
माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, हम आपको और आपकी प्रतिनिधि मंडल रूस में देखने से हमको बड़ी खुशी है।
एक्सेलेंसी, मैं आपकी मित्रता, गर्मजोशी भरे स्वागत और आतिथ्य सत्कार के लिए हार्दिक आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। मेरे लिए खुशी की बात है कि ब्रिक्स समिट के लिए कजान जैसे खूबसूरत शहर में आने का अवसर मिला है। इस शहर के साथ भारत के गहरे और ऐतिहासिक संबंध रहे हैं। कजान में भारत के नए कॉन्सुलेट के खुलने से ये संबंध और मजबूत होंगे।
Ваше превосходительство, в первую очередь позвольте от всей души поблагодарить вас за вашу дружбу, за теплое и радушное гостеприимство. Отрадно, что мне посчастливилось, что я приехал в Казань, в такой прекрасный город, для того, чтобы участвовать в саммите БРИКС. Индия имеет глубокие исторические связи с этим городом. И после того, как откроется генконсульство Индии, в этом городе наши отношения еще крепнут.
एक्सेलेंसी, पिछले 3 महीनों में मेरा 2 बार रूस आना हमारे करीबी समन्वय और गहरी मित्रता को दर्शाता है। जुलाई में मॉस्को में हुई हमारी एनुअल समिट से हर क्षेत्र में हमारे सहयोग को बल मिला है।
Ваше превосходительство, это мой второй визит в Россию за последние 3 месяца, и это свидетельствует о тесной координации и крепкой дружбе между нашими странами. В июле в Москве, как вы правильно упомянули, мы провели двусторонний саммит, и благодаря нашим дискуссиям наше сотрудничество во всех областях укрепилось.
एक्सेलेंसी, पिछले 1 वर्ष में ब्रिक्स की सफल अध्यक्षता के लिए मैं आपको बधाई देता हूं। 15 वर्षों में ब्रिक्स ने अपनी एक विशेष पहचान बनाई है और अब विश्व के अनेक देश इससे जुड़ना चाहते हैं। कल मैं ब्रिक्स समिट में भाग लेने के लिए उत्सुक हूं।
Ваше превосходительство, вы успешно руководите объединением БРИКС с начала года. За это я хотел бы вас поздравить. За последние 15 лет своего существования наше объединение БРИКС создало для себя особую личность, и сегодня многие страны мира хотят присоединиться к нашему объединению. Я с нетерпением жду наших дискуссий в рамках БРИКС завтра.
एक्सेलेंसी, रूस और यूक्रेन के बीच चल रहे संघर्ष के विषय पर हम लगातार संपर्क में रहे हैं। जैसा मैंने पहले भी कहा है, हमारा मानना है कि समस्याओं का समाधान शांतिपूर्ण तरीके से ही होना चाहिए। शांति और स्थिरता की जल्द से जल्द बहाली का हम पूरी तरह समर्थन करते हैं। हमारे सभी प्रयास मानवता को प्रमुखता देते हैं। आने वाले समय में भी भारत हर संभव सहयोग देने के लिए तैयार है। एक्सेलेंसी, आज इन सभी विषयों पर विचार साझा करने का एक और महत्वपूर्ण अवसर है। एक बार फिर बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
Ваше превосходительство, по поводу продолжающегося конфликта между Россией и Украиной мы регулярно находимся в контакте. Как я сказал и раньше, мы считаем, что проблемы должны решаться мирными способами, и мы полностью поддерживаем скорейшее установление мира и стабильности. Во всех наших усилиях мы даем приоритетное значение человечеству, и мы готовы оказать любое возможное содействие и в будущем. Ваше превосходительство, сегодня у нас будет возможность поговорить по всем этим вопросам. Еще раз хотел бы вас поблагодарить.
Спасибо.
Right, that's a brief message there, gives a big message of peace to Putin. Prime Minister Modi opening up to these bilateral talks that's currently underway. We have Shiv Arur joining us live from the newsroom, decoding this for us. Shiv, Prime Minister Modi stressing on peace, diplomacy, only solution to conflict. This is something that Prime Minister Modi has stayed true to right from the start. War is not the solution. He's opened up with that very statement.
And this is the second time that Prime Minister Modi is saying it to Vladimir Putin just this year. Remember, the India-Russia summit is the last time the two leaders met in July this year. The same message was conveyed at that time. Before that and after that, Prime Minister Modi had actually met Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky. So with today's meeting, with that hug that you have on your screen between Prime Minister Modi and President Putin, the Indian Prime Minister has met the presidents of Russia and Ukraine twice each just so far this year. So that, I imagine, puts him in perhaps a better position to talk peace to both these leaders regarding the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine than any other leader at this point of time. He said it's a time of conflict resolution, it's a time of peace and not war. It's something that he had first said during the G20 meet a couple of years ago, just after the Russia-Ukraine war had actually started, Nabila. But very importantly, the Prime Minister also adding that he's willing to offer any kind of help or support. Remember that India's position as being a possible...
I hope my voice is not on air. Shiv.
Yeah, so, the view that India is in a position to possibly be some kind of a mediator or a peacemaker between Putin and Zelensky, between Russia and Ukraine, has gathered a great deal of momentum, especially because of how polarizing the war is. All countries have had to take very, very, staunch positions on India, on Russia and Ukraine. India, having its unique position of having very healthy dialogue with both countries, has offered to be, that very rare, unique interlocutor. And that, I think, is the big takeaway from these opening comments between Prime Minister Modi and Putin. Remember, Nabila, these are only opening comments which are, for the public. Now, the actual bilateral delegation level discussions will take place behind closed doors, after which there will be a joint statement by both countries. But remember that India and and Russia have extremely healthy relations. They are old allies. There are very few instances, where Russia has made decisions that go against what India has wanted. You had Dr. S. Jaishankar, who's there seated next to Modi at that delegation level talk, speaking in Delhi yesterday, had talked about how, unlike many other countries, Russia is one country that has always been worthy of the mutual trust that is enjoyed between these two countries. So expect some big decisions, some big statements to come out of that joint statement right after the bilateral that we have right now. But very important message from Prime Minister Modi: I am willing to be of any support necessary to bring peace between the two countries.
Shiv, stay with us. I'm going to quickly cut across to Prime Minister Modi, who's spoken that opening statement he made about peace really being the solution. Listen in.
एक्सेलेंसी, मैं आपकी मित्रता, गर्मजोशी भरे स्वागत और आतिथ्य सत्कार के लिए हार्दिक आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। मेरे लिए खुशी की बात है कि ब्रिक्स समिट के लिए कजान जैसे खूबसूरत शहर में आने का अवसर मिला है। एक्सेलेंसी, पिछले 3 महीनों में मेरा 2 बार रूस आना हमारे करीबी समन्वय और गहरी मित्रता को दर्शाता है। जुलाई में मॉस्को में हुई हमारी एनुअल समिट से हर क्षेत्र में हमारे सहयोग को बल मिला है। एक्सेलेंसी, रूस और यूक्रेन के बीच चल रहे संघर्ष के विषय पर हम लगातार संपर्क में रहे हैं। जैसा मैंने पहले भी कहा है, हमारा मानना है कि समस्याओं का समाधान शांतिपूर्ण तरीके से ही होना चाहिए। शांति और स्थिरता की जल्द से जल्द बहाली का हम पूरी तरह समर्थन करते हैं। हमारे सभी प्रयास मानवता को प्रमुखता देते हैं। आने वाले समय में भी भारत हर संभव सहयोग देने के लिए तैयार है।
All right, let me cut across to Shivani, who's also joining us for a little more on that. Shivani, Prime Minister Modi's opening statement where he speaks of peace to Putin, saying diplomacy only solution to the conflict. We support peace and stability. India is willing to help in the conflict resolution. So in a way, also directing or at least communicating with Putin to see if there's a solution that can be brought off the current ongoing conflict.
Nabila, India's position is very unique in terms of getting connected to not only Russia but Ukraine also on making peace, and that's what we've seen when Prime Minister Narendra Modi was speaking in his bilateral meetings opening remarks. He said that we always prioritize mankind. Both the countries must find solutions for peace through dialogue. That's been the focus of the country, India. That's been the focus of India, and that's why he said that we've been connected throughout the conflict when it began in 2022 February end. Since then, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has not only made several phone calls to President Putin, but he's also met President Zelensky. And this year, if we say, Nabila, this is his second meeting with President Putin. He had visited Russia and he had met President Putin. He has already met President Zelensky. He's been talking of peace from both the sides, and he says that all the cooperation is there from India's side, and India is ready to cooperate in any manner. But mankind is the priority, and that's what the agenda of India has been in this whole conflict. And apart from this conflict, Nabila, it's very important out here that how these non-Western nations have gathered, and India is the most prominent voice of the global South, and especially when it comes to the development of these countries together, mutually respecting each other's interests. That's been the focus of the country, and India has already it has been saying that it shares a very special diplomatic relationship between
Absolutely.
Russia.
And in fact, we have Gaurav Sawant, who's currently in Russia, Kazan. I'm going to take it with him. Stay with us, Shivani. Gaurav, over to you on Prime Minister Modi's opening statement, appealing for peace and assuring that India is willing to help to find a conflict resolution. What does that mean?
Nabila, this has been India's consistent stance. India has always batted for peace and dialogue, diplomacy to end any conflict. And this has been India's consistent stand, whether it's between Russia and Ukraine or whether it's conflict anywhere else. And India has shown by example when you talk about the India-China situation along the line of actual control. Even here, while India used force to stall the advance of the Chinese forces along the LAC in eastern Ladakh, ultimately it's only through persistent diplomacy, through perseverance that India was able to get China to back off. Of course, it's a tactical, backing off by the Chinese forces at this stage. So there is disengagement. We still have to see whether this leads to de-escalation and ultimately de-induction of the 50,000 plus troops who've massed here. But let's for the moment talk about the first bilateral that's just started, and that's between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. This is extremely significant. Remember, it was on the 8th of July when Prime Minister Narendra Modi interacted with President Putin. They spoke for over 5 hours in that one-on-one on a possible peace formula that could be adopted in case it was acceptable to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Then subsequently the Prime Minister traveled to Kiev, had a long discussion with President Zelensky, and now he's back here. So in 3 months, he's back in Russia for the second time for another bilateral, and of course the BRICS Summit also. But this is something that the Prime Minister himself shows the deep ties between India and Russia. While they'll talk about the road ahead and peace process in Ukraine, a lot will also depend perhaps on the November 5th elections in the United States of America and its results. Who comes to White House, whose government is inaugurated on the 20th of January 2025? Is it the Biden administration or Kamala Harris as president of the United States? Then perhaps this conflict could go on longer. If it's Donald Trump, perhaps then you see a change and Ukraine will not have access to those kinds of long-range weapons and unlimited finances, and that may play a role in curtailing this conflict and perhaps double the effort to find peace. So there are many things that are on the table that are being discussed on the Russia-Ukraine front. But Nabila, do keep in mind, equally important, if not more for India, is India's energy security. India is a developing country and India is hungry for oil, for gas, for nuclear energy, and Russia is one of the biggest suppliers of all three to India, and at very discounted rates. It's something that's held the Indian economy in good stead in these past several years. So that energy security of India, Russia plays a very critical role. Russia is a very close ally of India when it comes to the nuclear field, when it comes to space, when it comes to defense. Defense is something where India and Russia have had historical relations, and those relations are being taken forward, from India buying Russian military equipment to the co-development of military hardware for future, to talking about space and cooperation in space, to fertilizers that India, and not just India, but the global south or the developing countries that get fertilizer. And Russia has such a rich, is a rich supply, has a rich supply of fertilizers. So food security, energy security, fertilizer security, in all of this, Russia plays such an important role. And when Western countries are critical of Prime Minister Narendra Modi hugging the Russian President Vladimir Putin, as he did once again today, what's the message? This is our culture. Russia is a very dear friend of ours. Never in India's history has Russia done anything which could be anti-India. So that is what shows our relationship, our deep relationship with Russia. And why should there be an impact on our relationship with Russia based on any other third country's relationship with Russia? That's the point India has repeatedly made to the world, Nabila.
While Prime Minister Modi spoke, he's also said very clearly that he's been observing and keeping in touch on Ukraine as well, and says particularly that India is willing to help when it comes to finding a resolution for this conflict. Now, this is almost Prime Minister Modi saying that he's even willing to mediate if need be. That's huge for him to be contributing in that manner towards a conflict that's ongoing for 2.5 years and sees no end.
Well, it just shows that India's stature on the world stage is ever increasing. It's a situation, look at it this way. It's a win-win for Russia. It's a win-win for Ukraine. It's a win-win for India. And let me tell you how.
it's a win-win for Russia, because any conversation with Ukraine, there's a friend of Russia that's participating in that conversation. How is it a win-win for Ukraine that a friend of Russia and such a close friend, of strategic partner of Russia, is talking to Ukraine to find a solution, and that friend is respected even by the United States of America and NATO countries? Win-win for India, because we are a country that civilizationally have been in the role of a Shanti Doot or a peacemaker. So as India becomes a very critical peacemaker, civilizationally, you remember Yogeshwar Shri Krishna was the Shanti Doot in Mahabharat between Kauravas and Pandavas. So this is something that a role that India has constantly tried to play. Whether you've succeeded or not is a different story. But that effort has been made, and India makes that same role, plays that same role even today, and not just in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. If I may, there's a very critical second bilateral that's likely to take place later today, and that is with the new president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian. And this is the first time that Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Iranian president would be meeting. And what does this indicate? It's an icebreaker between these two countries. Again, two countries that have had civilizational ties. India has the largest Shia Muslim population outside of Iran. That's point 2. And point 3, Iran is in trouble right now. Israel, again, one of the key strategic partners of India. Israel could be well on its way in a couple of days or weeks or perhaps months. It could be bombing Iran very extensively, and whether that bombing remains restricted in response to Iran sending 180 plus ballistic missiles into Israel, whether it remains restricted to military targets or takes on the oil infrastructure or goes on to nuclear sites or even places of command and control. I was reporting from Israel just last week, and Israel is very clear. It will target Iran sooner than later. They just want to sort out Hamas and Hezbollah first, and then they'll be targeting Iran. In that situation, India has an interaction with the new president of Iran, and would be a good idea to know what is Iran's new president thinking. So again, in that West Asia conflict, India is equally close to both the stakeholders, Iran and Israel. Civilizational ties with Iran, and very, very warm relationship with Israel. Again, a relationship that has held India in great stead in every conflict, whether before 1962, 1971, Kargil, or even that war against terror. Even now, Israelis were killed in that Pakistani terror attack during 26/11 in Mumbai, and that just goes on to show the two countries have shed blood fighting this radical Islamist terror.
Well, Gaurav, Prime Minister Modi, who just spoke, he opened up with a message for peace. I'm going to ask you now, this is the first bilaterals that he's had at the BRICS Summit, first with Putin. It's expected now that there could be a talk even with Xi Jinping. The decks are clear for that. There's been enough speculation that the two countries are mulling over having discussions as part of this summit. Any confirmation or word coming in from any of your sources?
So the next 24 hours will be very crucial. Whether that meeting takes place today or that meeting takes place tomorrow, we are still not sure. But, there is some conversation that a meeting between the Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Chinese President Xi Jinping could take place in the next 24 hours, if not the next 12 hours. It just depends on whether the two sides are able to find time and slot each other, because the Chinese President is having multiple meetings which are pre-scheduled. The Indian Prime Minister is having multiple meetings that are pre-scheduled. Tomorrow again is a very, very big day when it comes to the BRICS Summit. And then the Prime Minister flies back to India tomorrow evening. So it remains to be seen, whether they have a meeting, a pull aside, they meet in the Leaders' Lounge, whether they have a more organized meeting. That clarity is still not there, but we are told both sides are trying to find time. And that, in a way, should that meeting happen, would be like pressing the reset button on India-China relationship, given the disengagement that has taken place at the two remaining friction points at the line of actual control, Depsang and Demchok. But remember, Nabila, this is only disengagement. There still hasn't been de-escalation and de-induction. These are critical 3 steps that India insisted on. First, you disengage so that there is no accidental fire, accidental discharge of weapon in anger that could lead to an escalation. So you disengage first, You don't remain in eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation. That's step one. Then you de-escalate. De-escalation means that you withdraw your weapons of longer ranges, whether it's the artillery or your armor or your mechanized columns. They start moving back to their predetermined locations so that there is no accidental or intended escalation. And third is de-induction. More than 50,000 troops on either side amassed from their peacetime locations. They need to go back to their peacetime locations. That is when normalcy sets in and new CBMs or confidential blending measures are put in place for patrolling, that there is no accidental clash of two patrols, perhaps separate days for India and China to patrol up to their claim lines. So conflict resolution is a long way off. This is only the first tactical step of disengagement that has taken place, Nabila.
All right. Well, we saw, of course, Putin had big praises for India and Prime Minister Modi committing to the two countries' friendship. Prime Minister Modi also speaking about India-Russia relations have improved significantly from a few months ago that he visited Russia. We're going to take you through exactly what Prime Minister Modi said in his opening statement at the bilaterals with Putin.
Excellency, मैं आपकी मित्रता, गर्मजोशी भरे स्वागत और आतिथ्य सत्कार के लिए हार्दिक आभार व्यक्त करता हूं। मेरे लिए खुशी की बात है कि ब्रिक्स समिट के लिए कजान जैसे खूबसूरत शहर में आने का अवसर मिला है। एक्सेलेंसी, पिछले 3 महीनों में मेरा 2 बार रूस आना हमारे करीबी समन्वय और गहरी मित्रता को दर्शाता है। जुलाई में मॉस्को में हुई हमारी एनुअल समिट से हर क्षेत्र में हमारे सहयोग को बल मिला है। एक्सेलेंसी, रूस और यूक्रेन के बीच चल रहे संघर्ष के विषय पर हम लगातार संपर्क में रहे हैं। जैसा मैंने पहले भी कहा है, हमारा मानना है कि समस्याओं का समाधान शांतिपूर्ण तरीके से ही होना चाहिए। शांति और स्थिरता की जल्द से जल्द बहाली का हम पूरी तरह समर्थन करते हैं। हमारे सभी प्रयास मानवता को प्रमुखता देते हैं। आने वाले समय में भी भारत हर संभव सहयोग देने के लिए तैयार है।
All right, so that's what Prime Minister Modi has said. I'm going to bring in Gaurav on that as well. Gaurav, this is the start and really the opening to the BRICS Summit, the 16th edition. India is a founding member of the BRICS. We hear there's a lot of talk that there are more nations wanting to be part of this BRICS. This grouping is certainly significant, involves nearly 45% of the world's population. So a real strong counterweight to the West grouping, like the G7.
Interesting you should mention that, and interesting that the timing of this grouping and its expansion. So it started, as you very rightly pointed out, with 4 countries, Brazil, Russia, India and China, BRIC. Then the next year, South Africa joined, it became BRICS. Ever since, there's a huge demand and multiple other countries want to join this grouping. You've talked about population, you talked about, the economies, and these are powerful emerging economies, strong emerging economies of the world, and they want to take the global south along, and India being the main voice of the developing world. But that's also an important part. Which are the other countries that are joining? South Africa, United Arab Emirates, Eritrea, Egypt and Iran. So 5 more countries join in. That's why the Iranian president, first time as member of BRICS, he'll be welcomed into this fold. And of course, there'll be an interaction with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It's a bilateral that's being worked out on. But apart from these, the Russians are extremely confident that there are at least 20 to 30 other countries that have shown keenness to join the BRICS grouping, including, that failing terror state in India's neighborhood called Pakistan. Well, they may be invited to it, but can they join it? Well, India holds a veto, and if good sense prevails, a country like Pakistan, as long as it remains a state sponsor of terror, would and should be vetoed in joining a grouping of developing countries and economies coming together, because this grouping has a very positive agenda. In fact, one of the Russian officials we were speaking to said, look at G7 and look at BRICS. BRICS is talking about economic development. BRICS is talking about multilateralism. BRICS is talking about moving forward towards perhaps seeking a common currency. That's a long way off as of now, but a SWIFT-like system where, trade between all the BRICS economies is relatively easier. What's G7 talking about? Conflict and weapons and giving more weapons to Ukraine and bringing Russia down. So, that's the difference. One has a positive agenda. The other is seen as a country that has, or a grouping that is talking about conflict. But look at, again, India. India plays a pivotal role both in BRICS, one of the founding members, and plays a very critical role as an invitee. And for several years now, year on year, India has been invited to G7. And that shows India's importance is rising even in that grouping. And India is equally welcome in both the groupings. That is extremely interesting. So India is welcome at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, at the BRICS, at the G7, at the G20. India's successful presidency of G20 is where the global South, India was seen as not just a voice of the global South, but a country that delivers. India talking about the developing countries, especially in the neighborhood, irrespective of the government, whether hostile to India or friendly to India, India is helping those countries, be it Maldives, be it Sri Lanka, be it situation currently a government in Bangladesh may be hostile, but India is ever willing to help. That's the message that India is trying to get across. India is always a friend in need.
Absolutely. Gaurav, we're going to keep coming back to you, but thanks for now.